Hey, this is Tony with Salt Strong, and in this video we're going to be covering some different types of structure and cover that inshore fish like to relate to. A lot of people may be new to inshore fishing, or you just may not be familiar with certain terms such as a leeward point or a windward point or something like that. So I want to talk about that in this video and actually show you what it looks like on the map. So first, let's go over sort of the basics: seagrass and potholes. When you're looking at the map, this is over in Texas near Port Aransas. When you're looking at the maps, let's say you're pre-planning your trip, you want to find a good area with seagrass and potholes. So when you're looking for seagrass, you want to be looking for areas like this. Seagrass is pretty identifiable just by the look of it. As you can see, it sort of has a camo looking pattern. The seagrass is going to be that darker greenish, sometimes brown color, and you'll see these lighter colors mixed in, and those are the potholes. So grass, darker green color; potholes, the lighter colored or sort of sand colored areas that are mixed in with the grass. Now, seagrass with potholes are very ideal places for inshore fish because they create ambush points. Also, the seagrass acts as an area that bait and crabs and shrimp and all those food items can hide in. So that's why grass and potholes are very ideal areas to look for inshore fish pretty much year round. Now, as far as, let's say, right over here, you see this area that is in between this island and this island. Whenever you have a little cut, that's what we call it. We like to call it a cut that goes through in between two different pieces of structure. It's exactly what we call it, a cut. So whenever you hear the term cut, that refers to anything going in between an island or two islands, or maybe even a seawall and a piece of land. Anything that creates a cut that cuts through an area. Now, this can also be referred to as a trough. Pretty much the same thing. They're pretty interchangeable, but I would consider this more of a trough because it's more out in the open. You don't have one solid piece of structure on one side and another solid piece of structure on the other side. It's pretty much just an area that looks to be dredged out, which creates a trough. Now, these are also great areas for fish just because it creates a really good ambush point. You have a good depth change. You have shallow water going down to deeper water, so that gives a great area for fish to feed. They can easily go up from the shallows or down to the deep, or they can sit on that edge and they can ambush food that way. And also, during different times of the year, they can use these deeper areas close to shallow areas to quickly move from one to another. So let's say it's really cold outside, they can move down to those deeper areas while it's cold out, and then when that sun comes up, they can move up to those shallows. Next up, we have points. Points are pretty much any type of protrusion that sticks out from an area of land, whether it be a shoreline or an island. Those are what we consider points. And just to give some examples here, you notice this area right here, this shoreline. As you can see, it's a pretty straight shoreline going from here down to here, and then when you get down there to this area, this is what we call a point. Points are really good places for fish as well because, again, it creates an ambush point. Also, you usually have a good amount of depth changes around a point because you're going to have water flowing around those points. And when that water flows around those points, it will typically trench out the bottom quite a bit depending on how strong the current is in that area. So when that water trenches out that area, it'll sort of create a little sandbar, and then it'll also create a deeper cut or a deeper trough in that area, which creates a good ambush point for predators. So again, a point can be anything that sticks out from a shoreline. As you can see there, that's a point right there. Also, when you get up here, notice the shoreline goes out, then you have this point, and then it turns back in. And then right up here, you have 2 points with a cut going through. So multiple different types of structure right there. You've got a point right there and another point there, then a nice depth change and a nice cut or a trough going right through the middle there. Now, another term that's often used with points and also with islands is leeward versus windward. Let's say you have a leeward side of an island or a point. That's going to be the side that is protected from the wind. The wind is not hitting that side. When you have the windward side of a point or an island, that means the wind is hitting that side of the island. So let's take this island for an example. Let's say the wind is coming from the southeast hitting this side of the island, this would be considered the windward side of the island. And then this back side, where the wind is pretty much going over, it's not hitting that side directly, that would be the leeward side of the island. So just some terms there a lot of people aren't too familiar with, just in case you happen to hear those when you are, let's say, asking some friends like what side of the island or what side of the shoreline was working out best. They say the windward side, then that means that's the side that the wind was actually hitting. Now, another form of structure would be a channel. That is typically going to be an area that is marked for navigational purposes, so boats can get through there, but they also make great areas of fish, especially the edges of the channels. So to kind of determine what a channel looks like, it's going to stick out just because it is man-made, and it's going to look pretty perfect, I guess you can say, perfect line. So as you can see here, as opposed to a cut or a trough, a channel looks pretty straight. As you can see right here, you have a defined edge to it, you have a good amount of depth to it out in the middle, as opposed to the shallows on either side. So you can really tell that that was man-made, and it cuts through there, and it works as a navigational area for boats to get through. So again, channels, you're typically going to see that very straight line. You can see there's a channel running through here, close to the shoreline going down. So that is how you would identify a channel versus an actual trough or a cut going through islands or anything like that. So another type of structure is a shoal, and this is basically just a shallow sandbar. As you can see here, this is a good example right here of a shallow sandbar that runs along the edge of this flat. It comes up from deeper water, gets pretty shallow, and then it runs down to the flat. So that would be a good example of a shoal. Now, it could be the edge of a flat like that, or it could just be an isolated strip of sandbar, such as right here. So you can see that's a pretty skinny portion of sandbar right there. Again, same thing as a shoal. Now lastly, we have oyster bars, oyster beds, or oyster reefs. Pretty much all the same thing. And these can be easily confused with sandbars or shoals just because of how they look on the map here. And I'm going to show you the biggest difference when you are looking at them to identify them as compared to a sandbar. So all these gray areas right here, these are oyster bars. When you zoom in, you'll notice they have sort of a rocky look to them. They have all these little, almost looks pixelated when you're looking at it, and it usually has round edges to it. As you can see, it has pretty smooth round edges all around it, and they might be just a long string of an oyster bar or an oyster reef, or they might be isolated patches, as you can see here. And then sometimes you may have them actually right off of a point. As you can see here, this point right here has a few oyster bars sticking off of it. So that is how you would identify an oyster bar compared to a sandbar. So really quick, just to sort of show you the difference between a sandbar and an oyster bar as far as looking at it on the map. As you see here, this is very lighter colored, almost white, tan, and also brown. Those would be sandbars. And then when you're looking at the oyster bars, such as right up here, you notice it is more of a gray, grayish brown sort of color, and also has that pixelated look to it or rocky look to it, as opposed to being smooth like this sandbar right down here. So we discussed different types of structure and cover, everything from seagrass to potholes, cuts and troughs, islands, points, channels, oyster bars. All these different types of structure and cover are ideal areas to find fish. However, you have to know when to actually target those areas, because different times of the year, different conditions, different moon phases, different tides, all those factors are going to come into play and determine where those fish are going to be holding based on those conditions. So if you need help with that, definitely check out our Insider Fishing Club. So that will wrap up this video. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them down below. Until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.